Sure. Do you want me to go into my history with BUTI now, or you want to wait for that? Okay, sure. So I am a former singer. I am also sort of a former voice teacher at this point as well. But I founded my company, Beth Morrison Projects, which is a producing company, about 15 years ago. And I founded a festival in New York for contemporary opera called the Prototype Festival about 10 years ago. My company is based in Brooklyn and also Los Angeles. We commission, develop, produce, and tour contemporary opera and music theater projects around the world. So typically we're doing 3 to 5 world premieres of contemporary opera each year, and typically we're doing somewhere between 10 and 20 tours nationally and internationally around the world. You know, it's been my mission to really make opera cool and relevant, and to appeal to a young audience and a diverse audience around the world. So that's the short story.
That's great. Opera is cool.
There you go. It is.
It's so cool. And yeah, Angelica, why don't you do the same? Tell us a little bit about yourself and about Challenge the Stats.
Absolutely. Yeah. Opera is cool. I want to give that extra poke there. Yeah, absolutely. It's so great to be here. And I have such a love and connection for BUTI. It certainly is a strong point in my own story as well. But Challenge the Stats actually started as just a one-off project when I was in grad school. So I sort of grew up as a young performing musician, as a harpist through the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra's talent development program. And I remember, going off and doing my undergraduate degree in Toronto. And while I was there, around the time of 2000-ish, was when we started to see a lot of social issues start to come to the surface around police brutality in the United States. And I remember practicing in my practice room and working on, all of my beautiful excerpts. And I heard the news of Trayvon Martin. And I'm sitting in Toronto, like looking at the United States. I'm one of the only people of color, one of the only Black musicians at my school, and thinking, well, my goodness, I'm practicing these excerpts. I'm working so hard in this classical space, and my people are being killed. And so in a moment that was very similar, actually almost eerily similar to the moment that we're in right now as a nation, I decided to kind of shift some of my studies and in doing a master's degree in Boston at Northeastern University. And while I was there, I decided I was going to do just a concert. It was just going to feature some Black artistry, Black composers, and use this as a space to really encourage more people of color to celebrate the classical music space and to be involved in it. And it just kind of blew up from there. It was never expected to be an organization. I certainly expected it to be just one concert, but I realized that there was a lot of power in the space of classical music to have area of justice, specifically racial justice. So I'm in Atlanta now, and Challenge the Stats has continued on as an organization that empowers artists of color and uses music as a tool to speak to some of the inequalities in our nation.
Thank you very much for sharing. I wonder, you mentioned the similarities between the time of when you started Challenge the Stats and right now. Do you feel like things are different right now than maybe they were at that time, or does it seem very, very similar?
In some ways, things are similar, but in some ways, things are very different. And I think that there is a very powerful momentum that we're seeing right now, especially in the time of COVID-19, where everyone is at home and they have this space to reflect. They're reflecting internally with themselves, but they're also reflecting with the people that they are quarantined with. So whether that's family or whether that's roommates. But I think a lot of people are starting to really have these deeper discussions And also organizationally, we're seeing a lot of larger organizations now having a voice in a conversation that they've been a little bit hesitant to before. So I think there's a different urgency. But I also encourage, all of the students who are listening, for me, a moment like this completely shifted the dynamic of what I wanted to do with my life. And I would encourage, if there are other young musicians who are sort of feeling some pull, to really press into that and to explore that in a time like right now.
Thank you. And Beth, I know that Beth Morrison Project also focuses a lot on telling the story of our time, and from the very beginning, I think that was always part of the mission. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I find it sort of essential to tell the stories of our time, and what those stories mean. And opera is looked at as such a archaic art form, and complain that it doesn't feel relevant to their lives. Why would they go? And I can debate that with of course, but my answer to that is only new work, and to work only with living composers, and a diverse set of composers' voices. Create opera in a space that isn't in a 4,000 seat theater, but that might be in a 200 seat black box. And what that means for the art form when you're that close to the singers and like right on top of the performers, and to have that kind of visceral response by having that proximity. So yeah, I mean, when I was a student at BUTI and did the opera scenes program and all that, when I was teaching there, I was always trying to bring in the new piece, the new opera. Even back then, before I was even a producer, and just felt so important that students these days are not just getting the dead white men classics, but they're getting, women voices and people who are alive today can talk to them, and have a conversation about what the piece is and why they wrote it and what it means to them, and how to coach the students in those scenes as well. So new work has been an important part of my life. I was not encouraged to sing it in my degree programs, which is unfortunate, because I was sort of always told, new work will hurt you. And, I'm a voice teacher also. And so I can't say enough, that's not true. And there are so many people who've come who have that fear of singing new work, and that the teachers sort of implanted this into them. And I'm hoping that there will be, a real change around that at some point.
I hope so too. I think in previous of these chats that we've had, that has, I think, been a thread, a little theme that, new work is out there and it's so marvelous, and it can really do incredible work in bringing, people of diverse backgrounds and communities together over something that's created in their time that they have access to. And yet, you mentioned, Beth, the, hosting operas in like a 200 seat black box theater, and how proximity really makes an audience feel involved in the production. And, I know that, Angelica, you also do a lot of community work with Challenge to Stats. And so I'm going to ask you also about this in a minute. Beth, I wonder if the 200 seat theater, the very sort of almost intimacy of it, do you think that changes communities and larger groups of people from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you have that proximity, that intimacy, as you said, there's a chance for a dialogue that is much maybe it's just easier, because with all the shows that we do a lot of talkbacks, and typically we get like 3/4 of the audience that will stay for the talkback because they feel really invested in the story that was told. They want to learn more. They want to understand, the composer's story and all of that. So I do think that somehow that intimacy creates a space that is more curious, than on a larger spectrum. If you're at a 4,000 seat hall and you're at the back of the hall or 5 tiers up, you feel quite removed from what's happening on the stage. And so, I remember like the first year of our festival, the Prototype Festival, one of the major critics for the New York Times, Anthony Tomasini, he was reviewing a piece by Mohammed Fairouz called Sumaida's Song, and he had never been to a black box opera. In fact, most people never had, because it was a movement we were trying to start. And he just was saying, how incredible it was to be that close. And so for a critic like him who spends a lot of time in, the large houses, he was really sort of struck by it and how exciting it was to be so close.
Yeah, I think that, like you say, the proximity, the closeness of the audience, it sparks a curiosity. In your events, I know you do a lot of speaker series, a lot of performance, a lot of talkbacks, Angelica. Do you find a similar pattern?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that one of the beautiful things that we've seen in addition to that is really a deeper understanding, especially throughout communities of color. And so I think this even kind of connects to the BUTI experience, that when I went to BUTI to study, I was able to study with Ann Hobson Pilot, who was the first African-American female to hold a principal position in a major symphony. And I remember having a lesson with this woman who had such an incredible elevated position, this woman who was such a barrier breaker. And it was just overwhelming, I think, to see that reflection of myself from someone who had gone ahead of me and had truly opened doors for my own career. And so I think with the work that we do with Challenge the Stats, really trying to center and amplify these Black voices is really a part of our mission to continue to showcase, I think, a new narrative around communities of color. I think sometimes we're seeing so many different narratives that have popped up, especially, when I was listening around Trayvon Martin and his life and his experience. There were a lot of narratives that were coming around and the truth of just, racism that's held towards Black men in our society. And so what does it look like for a dancer to now take the stage in a way that showcases just the beauty and the power of a Black body? And what does that do? How do we kind of challenge the narratives that our society has placed around what it means to be a Black male? So I think that it's those kinds of sort of developing intimacy with our audiences that have really just grown in ways that we couldn't have expected. So definitely so interested in the ways that Beth is continuing to sort of create narratives and create stories and new conversations. I think it's so important.
And I think that what you both share, even in a different sense, is really just building that community, building opportunities for audience members and performers to reach out and have some of these conversations that are sometimes difficult and sometimes awe-inspiring, and ultimately bringing everybody closer together, which I think, is almost in a way the embodiment of BUTI. It's bringing a bunch of students from all over the place together to open your mind and grow as musicians and as people. And I wonder, maybe Angelica, we'll start with you. Can you tell me about what your experience was like at BUTI when you were there?
Absolutely. So I went to BUTI 2 summers in a row. So I was so obsessed, I couldn't leave. And BUTI for me was one of the first times that I'd really gotten away from home on such a big scale. As someone who grew up in the South, I grew up in Atlanta and grew up in a wonderful community of support and family. My father is a musician, and so I had some support. But to be honest, I was kind of getting to be a big fish in my space in Atlanta. And I remember going to being like, oh my gosh, I have to practice. Like, these people are playing circles around me, and I think I am cute with my little heart, but I have some work to do. It was a big wake-up call. Sure. And I think being around that level of just incredible performers, but I think also a supportive space was a really, really powerful thing for me. I also got a tic from like walking around the tall grass. So we won't have to talk about that, but I will say I ran up that hill so fast from Copley to the nurse's office. Like, I have never run that fast in my life. But other than that, wonderful experience. And I think, I would encourage the students who are listening now, even if BUTI is sort of in this virtual space for the summer, to continue to network and connect with each other. Some of my best, closest friends, closest colleagues, some of the artists I booked for CTS were people that I met when I was at BUTI. So I would really encourage you to continue to press into this community. The world of social media, allows us to kind of connect in a different way now, and to continue to celebrate your acceptance to BUTI, and that you're a part of this BUTI family.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, Beth, would you share also your experience as a student?
Yeah. So my experience as a student was one small part of my experience with BUTI, so I'll just focus on that 1 year as a student. I was also a big fish in a little pond. I was coming from Maine, a much smaller pond than Atlanta. But I had been doing mostly musical theater my whole life growing up. And I went to BUTI on my summer before my senior year of college. And I was just opened to a world that I didn't even know existed. I had never had classical music in my life in any significant way. I grew up on my mother's music, which was Barry Manilow and Neil Diamond, and Donna Summers. So when I arrived, I still will never forget the day of just arriving to BUTI, my parents driving in to the campus and getting out and just hearing music all around me, and like horns that I couldn't see but I could hear, a bass player under a tree, practicing away, and I was just immediately struck by an environment that was all about music. I'd never had that growing up. And so, that summer changed my life 100%. It opened me up to classical music. And that summer were some of the extraordinary singers, Norman, Kathleen Battle, Thomas Hampson, Leonard Bernstein was there. It was like one of his last appearances. So it was just an extraordinary welcome, and just like a whole universe that was made known to me, and I fell in love hard. I was hook, line, and sinker. I had always wanted to go to New York and be a Broadway singer. After that summer, I was like, no, classical music is where I'm going, and that was sort of the start for me.
Wow, but it wasn't the end, right?
It wasn't the end, no.
So tell us about your slightly longer extended history.
Sure. Yeah. So much to my surprise, I ended up spending 13 summers at BUTI. I was a voice teacher. I started as a resident assistant for a couple of years, then went to grad school, came back as a voice teacher, then was an administrator, then was the director. And it was a very long love affair of 13 summers with what was my summer home for a number of years, and my inspiration every year to be around professionals of that level, but then to be around the students of BUTI who the heart of the place, and just the knowing how many people were having that experience that I had, which was so transformative. It was, there was nothing better at that point in my life than to experience that rush of, watching students' minds be opened and blown, and trying to give them an experience that was meaningful.
I have to say that that rush, that feeling of getting out of the car the first time, and somewhere under a tree is a bass player, in the distance is a horn player. I miss doing that kind of stuff. When we get to be out here like in the field doing our things, being adults, yeah, we don't get that as much anymore. I really miss that. Really miss that.
Yeah.
But I want to get a little deeper into how you started each of these projects, which are so impressive. And Angelica, you alluded already to the fact that it wasn't really, I woke up one day, I'm going to start this huge thing, it's going to do this, and it's going to do this, and I'm going to do it this way. What was the evolution like?
Oh my goodness, not at all. I had no intention of this being the pathway. I was going to play an orchestra, Nicole. That was it. That was the goal. That was the focus. Every single decision and step was like, let me go get these excerpts and this little Mozart flute and harp concerto so I can get my job and call it a day. But yeah, check, right? Like one plan. And I think that was a plan, one that I was excited about. I don't ever want to say I wasn't encouraged by that, and, would encourage other students who, if that is your passion, go for it, like totally take your whole selves to this field, create change from the inside out. 100%. But as I kind of mentioned before, right? But as I mentioned before, there were a lot of things that were starting to kind of bubble up to the surface. Again, very similar space we're now, and I just really had to look at myself and my career and say, if I didn't do this one thing, so if I didn't pursue this one thing that's like really laying on my heart, what would I think about my career later? If I got the orchestra job, if I got the job that I really am working towards, is it really gonna fulfill me in the way that this little seed of a crazy idea would? And so actually, my decision to do a master's at Northeastern was really a plan to take 1 year. So it was a 1 year master's program called Music Industry Leadership. I was going to take 1 year off of the instrument as a way to just explore this. And if it didn't work, I would go back to my plan of an orchestra job, and it was just 1 year and it was fine. But the more that I started to dive into this work, I realized I just had to do it. There wasn't a choice. That I really found that this passion was so large that I just had to do something. And let me tell you, that first concert was not perfect. There were many issues and concerns. There were many, things that were missed off of the program, or ways that, I was communicating with partners that I would never do now. But, I knew that I had to just do it. And so I would say the same thing for, students who are practicing their instrument now, and maybe they're interested in something. It could seem so far away. To me, the issue of police brutality seems so far away to classical music, but I knew I just had to find the connection point and just try it. And that's really where this work started, was just me stepping out there, being brave, and just trying it. And from that point on, getting it to Atlanta, I had a little bit of a tester beta that had been done. And I really just came back and started from an authentic place of saying, this is what I love to do. I don't know exactly how to do it, but I know, you are an organization talking to partner organizations. You're an organization who might have interest in this work. Can we talk about it? What would it look like for classical music to come into the space? And specifically, recently we've been looking a lot at COVID-19's effect on Black communities, which has been very severely disproportionate. And finding ways to speak to healthcare workers and ask, well, what would it look like for us to do things that are honoring? What would it look like for us to be a part of this space? So a lot of the work really started, one, by just stepping out there and being brave and kind of crazy, and two, just talking and saying, I'm not sure. I don't know is an okay thing to say. And I still say it now all the time. I had a meeting today with some people in the healthcare field, and we were talking about HIPAA, and I was like, I don't know anything about that. Teach me, help me learn. Right. So continuing to be teachable, I think, has been a really big thing in growing an organization, and something that I would encourage all the students who are listening to continue to say, I don't know, but I'm here to listen and learn.
I love that. I really identify with that in the early years of starting my company, where I had gone to get an MFA in theater management and producing specifically for the idea of starting this company. And I soon realized when I graduated that actually I was never taught how to start a company.
Yeah.
You know, so it was like feeling like constantly like I have no idea what I'm doing, but starting from a place of authenticity. And I think it was really interesting what you said, and like you did this thing and you realized like, oh, there's actually a need for this thing. And that's what happened with me too. It was just like, oh, I'm starting this company at a time when composers are looking to be doing opera at a much younger than they do, you know, normally, and they don't know how to produce it, and they needed me and I needed them. And I was also at a time where it was like, you know what, I need to be working towards some sort of equality in this field, and it's just not okay anymore to only be doing the work of white men. And you know, that's been constant from day one with us. And we've championed women. Like, I mean, sadly in this field, like diversity can mean women. In most fields it doesn't, or white women, I should say. And you know, that's something that I've worked over the last 15 years very hard to change in our programming, as well as you know, diverse voices. And it's such an important thing, and I have a lot of respect for you, Angelica, and what you're doing, and how you've come from that place of authenticity, and you know, to really address a need. Like it's really important in this field. I feel constantly frustrated in classical music how far behind we are in these issues. We're so far behind theater. Theater is like so far ahead of us, and I'm sort of constantly watching and looking in the theater field to see like, how can I bring us along in a way? How can I push at those boundaries and call it out? You know, like honestly, like I've been spending a lot of time doing panels since, I mean, everybody's doing panels now, right? Since we're all sitting at home. So I've done a million of them. And, you know, one of the things that I think is important to say is that classical music is a white supremacist art form. I don't mean that in the sense of the KKK, but I mean that in the sense that we are mostly doing dead white men, and that is not acceptable. It's simply not acceptable. And so we need to look at like systemic change, not tokenism, systemic change. And, you know, I think that's where, honestly, Angelica, I would look to people like you to help lead that. And for people like my husband, who I was telling you about in the preview, like, we need activists to show us what to do to bring this art form along, and we need allies. And that's what I take that very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely, Beth. And I think, you know, if I think back to the very beginnings of when this started in my master's, there would be no way I would be where I am without a woman named Margot Saulnier, who was a white woman and was a professor at Northeastern. And she was the most beautiful example of allyship. And there's literally, she would sit with me and she would spend so much extra time during her day. She would get up early. She would put her neck on the line for me. She would, you know, expand her network and put me into positions that I truly didn't feel qualified or ready for. But it was this idea that I couldn't have gotten sort of those next steps further without this incredible woman, this wonderful white woman who was using her position and her power to elevate my voice. And so I think it goes both ways, right? Like, we need everyone from every direction in this conversation pushing. And so, Beth, I just, you know, commend you for continuing to speak out, because that costs you something. You know, as leaders in this space, it always costs you something to speak and to be authentic. So, you know, thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you both for the work you're doing. I mean, it's so inspirational to me, and also really informs the work that we do at BUTI too, to help make that a safe and welcoming space for everybody. And I wonder, since we're on this topic, if either or both of you could talk about or have experienced, like, as you're doing this work, specific discrimination or barriers because you're a woman or because you're a woman of color? I'm so curious. What are the battles that you've had to face?
Yeah, I mean, I think as women, we face battles in this field all the time. But as a person of color and a woman, I can only imagine how much goes. And so I don't want to take away from that and with my story in a way. But I will say that, the first Opera America conference that I went to, I walked into a room of all white men wearing suits. And I was dressed, in some crazy thing. And I just remember like looking at the group and going, I don't belong here. And then hearing the conversation, which at that point was a conversation of why they couldn't do new work. And then I was like, oh, okay, this is my art form. These are not my people. I am leaving this shit behind. Sorry, I am leaving this behind, and I am finding my own way. And that's what I did. And then I came back 6 years later to the conference, and things had really shifted. There was like a very big shift that happened in the industry where all of a sudden people were interested in what I was doing. And I was hearing from people like, oh, you're changing the field. And I was like, I am? Like, I was just off doing my own thing, but people were paying attention. I didn't know they were paying attention. I just was trying to put forward my most authentic voice and what I truly believed needed to happen in the field. And so to realize like people were paying attention was really something incredible. But, all of the open positions for general directors that have come available in, the last year and a half are still all going to white men. They're very often going to white European men. And there says that there's people say like there's change, like, we want change, there is change, but then at the end of the day, the people who make change are the people at the top. So if all of the people at the top are still white men, then the rest of the industry isn't going to change. And so it's very important to me. Part of the thing I speak out about a lot is how do those people get into positions of power, and how do we shift the paradigm so that we create a new system. And I talk a lot about this, and I'm hoping that at some point it's going to catch fire, but it starts at the board level. And before that, it starts with the search firms that the board hires. That the search firms aren't putting forward candidates that are women, that are people of color, then the board doesn't have anybody to choose from. And, people say, oh, but, there are only a few level 1 companies, which is the highest level, right? That's like the Met, LA Opera, Houston Grand, San Francisco, Chicago Lyric. If there aren't people who are already in positions of power, then who shifts? It's only another white man that shifts. So it's like really fundamentally trying to determine how do we change the system. And I have a lot of ideas on that. And I keep talking about it in as many forms as I can. And here to the next generation, it's so essential that things change for them and that they are part of the change. And what I can impart more than ever is like, don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to let your voice be heard. Like it's essential at the age that BUTI students are at, that they understand that they have an opportunity to do something more than just play their instrument or sing their song. That they're incredible role models as well in the industry, that are performers that have championed these causes as well.
I think that's so beautiful, Beth, and it's such a beautiful charge too, that these voices of these BUTI students are so critical, especially to hold organizations and adults accountable to the things that they say and the things that they say that they stand for. So I would just champion that again. And I think in terms of Nicole's question, in terms of sort of barriers and boundaries, yes, there's always consistently boundaries as a woman, as a Black woman, as a very petite Black woman, as a very young, petite Black woman. I mean, it's just, we kind of compile a lot of identities together in the space that I navigate. And I think being taken seriously or being able to be passionate without becoming the angry Black woman narrative has really been an interesting line to walk. And so, again, just championing one of the things Beth said is kind of creating space at the table. So these large executive high level tables, there have to be voices that are amplified, that are voices of communities that organizations say they want to serve. It's critical that those thinkers are around the table making the hiring decisions, making the decisions about how money is allocated in the organization. We'll see representation on stage really begin to shift when we have those larger structures. So it has to go kind of both ways. And I think just continuing to encourage all of the students who and are a part of this conversation to be a part of those conversations, to continue to sort of push forward, push that narrative towards change, and also just encourage you're not too young. When I started doing the work of Challenge the Stats and planning the concert, I didn't know how to be an advocate. I didn't know even any of the language around social justice. It was still kind of fresh and new in terms of vocabulary in that space, but I knew enough. And so I would just encourage everyone who's listening to continue to just speak, to continue to hold accountable, and to continue to let your voice be heard, because it really is powerful regardless of how young you are, where you're from, what your culture or ethnic background may be, your socioeconomic status. Your voice, it matters. And so continuing to let your voice be heard is really critical as we kind of navigate some of those boundaries in the field.
And also to advocate for each other, right?
Yes.
So,
Right.
I mean, if you feel like, people of color and women are not being given the leg up in whatever situation, fight for them. Do that.
Absolutely. And almost Beth and I have done too, build your own table, right?
Yeah,
if the table of the field is not working for you, or you got to pull up a rickety chair that's got 3 legs and it's squeaky when you sit on it, or you got to bring your folding chair, just make a new table. And there are a lot of people who are in the field kind of creating these really innovative spaces, and larger organizations are looking on to see how this work is authentically done.
That's right. And when you build your own table, it's communities like the BUTI community that you can, you meet somebody and you say, we're on the same page about this. Let's sit down together and think about how we can take our ideas and impact our community, impact big organizations. This is a table that you create for yourself through your network. And that's, it starts here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that networking piece is so important, finding those mentors. If you are a woman, finding another woman who's a couple steps ahead of you, that you can just talk to kind of help you expand those ideas out. If you are a woman of color, making sure that you have a community of support of people who understand kind of the intricacies of this space. So I would just really champion that again.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, having a mentor is so important, and so often people don't have them. But I would say that you need to kind of make that happen, if you will. I mean, I'm not sure if when I was in high school I would have been able to have done that, but certainly later in my life when I was, founding the company and doing my degree at Yale, I was, had a conversation with the man who runs Brooklyn Academy of Music, and he basically told me I needed to meet the women in the field. And he gave me a list. He gave me a list of about 10 different women, and I went down the list and met them, and finally arrived at somebody, and I was like, okay, I want to be you. So how do I get to being you? And she really took me under her wing. And I think it's a very, very important thing to have mentorship, and don't wait for it to come to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually really resonate with that a lot. When I was at Northeastern, I remember sort of wanting to have that mentorship space and was interested in some other areas that I wasn't necessarily finding in my course structure. And so I sat down and I went on the internet, the Googles, like everyone can do, and just started to look at all of these professors. I had like a list of like 1,000 and just went one by one and really researched the people that I wanted to meet, and then was able to reach out and make those connections. So totally agree, Beth, that it also takes some on your part, because nobody's just going to kind of reach out and say, hey, let me save my time and, free help and support. Like really putting forth that effort is really critical.
Yeah, and I feel like people in the fields who, I think we have a sense of like we need to pay it forward.
Yeah.
So, I'm now, of course, like, not the person looking to be mentored. I have the privilege of being able to mentor other people, and I'm, I would say every month I get calls, from people or emails from people who are asking me, can I have 20 minutes of your time, or whatever, that are young people. And I think in particular when you're young and you're in school, people want to help, like they want to help you, and so take that to heart and also exploit that as much as possible. Like there's a real generosity of people for students. And if you're someone who's, an upstart and you want to really try to make a go of things, you have to be a little bit bold and ask for the time of these people that you want to meet.
Mm-hmm.
And most likely they'll say yes.
One would hope. I wanted to ask, and we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but I think it's a nice way to frame what you're doing now. And Angelica, a little earlier you touched on this. When you were these students' age, when you were at BUTI, you said you were thinking, I'm gonna have an orchestral career. Maybe you had your blinders on. You were practicing your excerpts. Is that true? Do I have that right?
Oh yeah. Blinders all the way on. No right or left. Like no. This is the goal.
And Beth, what about you? Was it you said?
Oh yeah, the same. I think pretty much everyone at BUTI is like either completely focused or knows like I'm probably not going to make a profession of this, but I really love this. And so I think the people who are in the zone, it's great, like be in the zone, but also know that there are other opportunities for you. And while I'm not a performer and really haven't been a performer professionally, except for maybe like 2 years after grad school, it was like, okay, well, every single decision I have made as a producer is informed by me having been a performer and a musician at a high level. And so I can make decisions that are informed from the artistic perspective. And that makes me a very different kind of producer. And there are so many jobs that, I didn't even know existed when I was a high school student in the arts. But let me tell you, like singers in particular, they're like running the arts, the performing arts world. It's like, yes. It's like, I think it's because there are too many of us and like there's not enough jobs, or I don't know. I think it's also because we multitask so well because, you have to like act, work in language, memorize all those things. So I think like we're like just primed to be in management. But, there are wonderful ways to be close to this art form that don't mean being a professional performer.
And Angelica, you are still doing a lot of performing, is that right? And
yeah, I wear all of the hats. Yes.
Yeah, I know that.
Falling off my head.
I happen to know that about you, and I think that's not a hidden thing, because one of our students emailed us with a question for you. Her name is Lindsay Howcomb. She's from Mansfield, Connecticut, and she would have been in the harp program this summer for the third year. Oh, so we're so sad, but she wants to know. Lindsay. Yeah, nice little heart.
Hearts for Lindsay.
She wants to know how do you manage your time? Do you have any advice for time management, for getting it all done and getting it done really at a high level?
Right. Right. Absolutely. Thank you, Lindsay. That is such a great question and something I struggle with all of the time. I think one really important point before I even talk about my schedule is the wonderful Shonda Rhimes, who I love, says no is a complete sentence. And I think learning to say no to certain opportunities has been huge for me to be able to manage all of the different buckets that my life is in, whether it's, teaching, performing, running a nonprofit, having a personal life. There just has to be a very clear personal mission in terms of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think that really allows you to agree to certain things and to others. So I would start there in terms of schedule management, is making sure that the things that you are agreeing to are really life-giving and are really feeding into that sort of personal mission or passion that you have. In terms of tangibly, on Sundays every single week, I take a piece of paper and I look at my iCal and I write it out. And if my hand is tired by the time I get to the end of my week, I have too much on my schedule and I need to reallocate and move and shift. And I'm also a really big advocate of having, these blocks of times that are just for like rest and restoration and ensuring that my schedule, that is part of my schedule. In terms of practicing, I practice really well after 10 o'clock at night. I basically run my day from like 11 to 3 a.m. That's my schedule. That works for me. I work really well between the hours of midnight and 3. And so if that works for you, then I would just kind of encourage you in this time of quarantine, not to drive your whole family crazy, but just to maybe explore what your own, personal schedule and rhythm may be. So a couple other tangible things, but feel free to kind of, reach out to me if you have more questions on that for sure, Lindsay. Thanks for your question.
The kind offer. I want to go back to something you said, because I think students especially, and even I, feel like I get a lot of conflicting, this is probably how you should do it. And there's one school that's like, say yes to everything. And there's a whole other school that's like, you do not have to say yes to everything if it doesn't feel right, if it's not, you can say no, period. And like you say, it's a complete sentence. I wonder, Beth, you look like you have an opinion.
I was from the other point of view of say yes to everything until it just became completely overwhelming and I had to start saying no to things. But yeah, at the beginning, I definitely said yes to everything.
Yeah, I have done that too.
For me, it was like, you have an experience, and even if you don't know where that experience is going to go, like inevitably everything, you have to see like the path ahead, which is this might lead to that, which might lead to that, which might lead to something over here that you never even thought was remotely possible. And and so that was the sort of MO that I went with. But
I love that. Yeah.
Completely understand the other side of it too.
But I think you're so right. Like you're able to learn whether you like something or not, and unless you sort of try it and reach out into that space, you'll never know. So there's certainly that balance point too.
Yeah, and I've definitely had like a lot of people, say, well, you don't have like a work-life balance, and that is true. I've never had a work-life balance. That's the way that I wanted it. I wasn't giving anything up. That's what I wanted. And so like my closest people, are artists that I've worked with on projects and things that we've created together. And it helps that my husband and I don't live in the same city. So I had a lot more time on my hands than this would have. But yeah, for me, that wasn't a need for me. Most people, I'm a little bit of a freak. Most people really do want and need more of a work-life balance than I've ever wanted. So.
I think there's something there. I think, like you're saying, Angelica, finding what works for you, and that takes some trial and error, right? Okay. So maybe it's not saying
the young person, sure.
Yeah, maybe it's not saying yes to just everything, but saying yes to something you haven't done, or saying yes to a person that you haven't worked with yet. And the person over there who keeps asking you to play that same type of thing over and over again that just drains you completely of your energy and doesn't do anything for you, you can say, actually this time, no, I have other
I'll
stuff.
say, like, if I can put in a plug for the composers, of BUTI, the performers should be seeking the composers out, because what happens with the composers is they always need somebody to perform their music. And when they start to get famous, they might think back to you and say, oh yeah, that person who was able to do this thing that I really needed in that piece. And then they look you up and they find you, and then all of a sudden you have a gig, And so I would say, like, always make friends with the composers. Tell them that you want to be their guinea pig, and help them explore, whatever your instrument is or whatever your voice type is.
True. Plus, there's something just so cool about being part of like a creative from the ground up process.
It's everything.
It's amazing. I've done some of that work where something got missed, or like something just on the violin, if something is just impossible. And it's nice to be able to go to the composer and be like, I'm not sure. And they're like, well, that's fine. I have this other great idea. And then suddenly you're part of it. It's,
Yeah.
so beautiful. It's amazing. And I love this concept of community and networking that kind of has come through all the way, all the way through our talk. I really am so curious, but I don't want to go over our time. So I'll just be mindful of that. But I want to ask you, Beth, we'll start with you. Was there ever a moment in this process that you thought to yourself, I don't want to do this, or this is too hard, or it's not working? And how did you work through that?
Oh my God, there were so many moments where I, particularly at the beginning of the company, like I'd say like the first 5 years, I would, it was just me. I didn't have anybody working with me at that point. And so there's just so many late nights, and like, I have a lot of skills, but I'm not the best at everything that is needed to run a business, right? So like all of the sort of financial stuff was like never easy for me. And the fiscal management, I just was so many late nights crying and like worried about I couldn't raise the money, and fundraising is a huge part of what I do, and it's very hard, and it's always been hard. The stakes just got higher, so it's still hard now, but so yeah, I mean, those moments, I never questioned what I was doing. I never questioned, for whatever reason, I never thought of quitting. That was never an option. I'm somebody who doesn't quit. So it had to be successful, but it was hard. Yeah, it was very, very hard. And I had a lot of dark moments, particularly those first 5 years, I would say.
And Angelica, have you had these moments?
Yeah, I definitely resonate with the late nights crying and like, why did I do this? This is crazy. I think for me in those moments, again, it kind of comes back to community. So having a community of other small orgs who are kind of in the same life stage, if you will, of where we were at was really helpful. Just to have someone to reach out to and say, this is way too much, trying to fundraise and to find the support, especially as a small organization, can be really, really stressful. So again, having that community of support was really vital, and being open to like changing course, being flexible was a big thing to really allow it to grow in a way that was successful.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's so helpful to know that, it's not a straight path, and it's not always easy peasy. And, we get to these places after a lot of ups and downs, a lot of doubt, that we, like you say, lean on our community and our network for support, and keep going. And eventually, the ups and downs never really stop, I think, but there's a trajectory upwards. So we're coming to the end of our time, and I love to finish with this, even though it's just the most impossible, ridiculous question to ask at this particular time. But I want to know what you're excited about, what's coming next, we can reframe that as when COVID is over, if ever that happens, fingers crossed, like, what are you most excited about? Angelica, or
Angelica, go.
Okay, sure. Either way. I will say, I think just seeing where our world is right now, in the midst of COVID, in the midst of the racial unrest, as much as it can feel very overwhelming, I will say that there is some excitement that I have had, just to see people becoming a part of the conversation, Challenge the Stats as an organization, just being sort of navigate that alongside people in the field, alongside organizations that normally we wouldn't be able to connect with. So the virtual world, I think, is really opening a lot of opportunities and a lot of ways for us to build new forms of performance and connection in this space. So I'll say I'm like disappointed but excited, and all the emotions all together with me.
Yeah, I'm sort of similar. I mean, I would say that, I think this digital realm offers an exploration. It offers me as a producer who, has become a seasoned producer of stage works, an opportunity to like expand and become essentially a TV producer. My company has a number of digital initiatives that we're doing, and so it's been fun to explore those. It's been fun to realize we're reaching a different audience, I feel a sense of optimism about the access time is giving to people who may not otherwise have been able to see a show or an opera or whatever, to engage, because unfortunately the classical music world ticket prices are just too high.
Right.
And so the digital space is giving an opportunity to democratize that, and that feels essential. And my company generally works with presenters, except for our festival where we keep the ticket prices low, but most presenters don't, they can't. And so it's something that I'm feeling excited about right now, is the access that we're all allowing to have a different audience.
Those are both exciting. I personally can't wait for 2021 at BUTI. Can't wait to get out to Lenox and to see you all there. Angelica, Beth, thank you from the deepest bottom of my heart. Thank you for taking the time to spend with us. This is really marvelous for me. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.